right, so today we're going to talk about who Faith in Place is, why we advocate, we being people of faith. What is CEJA? You might hear it called CEJA. You might hear it called its full name, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, either or. And then how we can help build healthier communities through implementation of this bill. So I am Christina Crost. I'm the policy coordinator at Faith in Place, and I live in East Central Illinois. I'd like to also introduce Pastor Scott Unquay, who is the policy director at Faith in Place. And we have some special guests here as well with us tonight. We have Brianna Parker from Elevate, and we have Reverend Marcus Tabb from the South Shore United Methodist Church, as well as the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. So we're thrilled to have them with us today, and we'll talk a little bit more about with them in a panel discussion toward the end of the presentation here. So we want to remind you who Faith in Place is and what we do. We are people of faith all over Illinois, from Chicago down to Cairo, helping people of faith be leaders in caring for the earth by providing resources to educate, connect, and advocate for healthier communities. And our vision is diverse people of all faiths leading the environment movement toward justice. But there's only so much we can do just as individuals or collectively as a small house of worship in a community. We must change policies and systems to create the world that we want. And so nowhere has that been more evident, I think, than Illinois this year, where it was this grassroots movement that helped pass this amazing and nation-leading climate bill. So people of faith are a very powerful force for change. Just ask any legislator who's been receiving petitions and emails from us for the last 3 years related to climate justice and climate legislation. We are persistent and we are persuasive, and often representatives like to lean on a faith community. It's part of their identity, but we will hold that representative accountable then. So that is part of our job and why we're so important. So we want to just kind of start by setting some background here. And we're going to ask that through a poll, which should have just popped up on your screen, about, how familiar are you with the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act? Is this the first time you've heard of it? Have you been doing this for the last 3 years with us? Just, it helps us to know how deep to go when we're talking about the bill, or maybe if we need to stop and make sure that everybody understands what's going on. So this will help us know what audience we are speaking to today. So I'm watching the poll answers come in. Most of you have participated. Thank you. It's kind of almost evenly split between very familiar and somewhat familiar. And so this conversation might be a little bit more what they would call wonky, or maybe detail oriented, in the weeds with some of the policy discussions. But never fear, if any of this that we talk about today is way over your head and you need a refresher, we've got resources to help you. We can come do a presentation at your house of worship and start at ground level and then work our way up. So if this is a little bit too fast for you this evening, we can definitely work on that with you as well. Just reach out to us at Faith in Place. All right, so I'll share the results so you can see them on your own screen, but most of us are pretty familiar or somewhat familiar with the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is great, which means we've done our job explaining it to you, and we will keep doing that. So I will stop sharing that. And Pastor Unquay, take it away.
Thank you, Christina, so much for getting us to this point. We know that advocacy absolutely matters, and this is why we're here today, because of the advocacy efforts that we have put forth to get it to a point where we were actually able to get a bill signed that's forward-leaning and actually the leading piece of legislation in the country when it comes to climate. And earlier today, I was on a panel with the state of Minnesota as they are looking to us on advice on how they can get to a Climate Equitable Jobs Act themselves. And so historical studies suggest that it takes 3.5% of a population engaged in sustained nonviolent resistance to topple brutal dictatorships. We love that quote because we know that it takes all of us to move the envelope to the point where we are successful. And today we are celebrating because of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, all of our coalition partners, all of you, the governor's office who have, all of our state legislators who voted for the bill, those who you reached out as far as your petitions, those that you're going to encourage to support any other future legislation that benefits people in the state of Illinois. It took all of us to get to this point. And so does advocacy matter? Absolutely. So at Faith in Place, we have what they call a green team model. And the way we reach you is because we go to houses of worship, and it doesn't take a whole lot of people to be successful. 3 people meeting once a month. And we offer tips on your green teams. And so if you have a green team or would like to start a green team, please reach out to us. We have outreach coordinators that would love to come to your house of worship and talk about how you can get involved, especially in the area of advocacy, which is, of course, my passion. But then there's so many other avenues in Faith in Place that you can participate in. And those pictures there are just some pictures of our green team. And so go ahead, next slide. So what ways to hold our legislators accountable? This is something we teach. We visit with elected officials virtually now, but of course, pre-pandemic, we were actually showing up at their offices. Of course, we do town halls, and at the end of this presentation, we're going to give you a list of upcoming town halls that we will be participating in throughout the state. Phone calls, emails, and letters to your legislators are absolutely important. One of the deciding factors on this passage of the CEJA was because many of our legislators received letters and phone calls and emails from constituents throughout the state. And that was because of the urging of our partners, as well as Faith in Place, that encouraged them to make sure they reached out to their legislators. Witness slips on the day that a bill is called or that's in a hearing. We often encourage people to do witness slips. It's as easy as going to illinois.gov, filing your witness slip on as a proponent or an opponent of a bill. We still encourage that. At the time that the bill came out of committee for the Senate, I think we were close to 2,500 witness slips as proponents for the CEJA. At that time, Senate Bill 2408. And then we do op-eds and letters to our editor. You can find some of our op-eds on our websites, either our Action Fund website or our Faith in Place website. And then, of course, we have social media engagement. We love social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have social media days where we send out messaging collectively as a coalition. And then Faith in Place and our outreach coordinator and our comms team, we always have something to talk about on social media. So voting, of course, helps. This is really important. So we encourage you to register to vote, especially during these midterms. We know that in November, we will have an election, and it may not seem important in Illinois, but if you know people around the country, there are some very important elections that are actually happening in other states. But I have made it a point that I don't miss an election day. If we are voting for the dog catcher, I'm going to vote. So register to vote, educate yourself on upcoming elections, and vote early and help others to vote. So again, if you vote early, you can always take somebody to the poll, or you can encourage somebody themselves to vote early. Get election reminders and more at vote.org. Okay, so how did we get here? How did we get here? Well, I joined the Clean Jobs Coalition in 2018 when I came on to Faith in Place's organization as the policy director. At that moment, in that December, 3 years ago, I was responsible for leading and keeping the organization up to date on CEJA. Now, at that point, CEJA was called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And the Clean Energy Jobs Act had came about because in the year of 2018, at least 60 listen, leads, and shares had occurred throughout the state. And the ideas that they had with the people around the state, they brought all of those ideas to a working group. And from that working group, CEJA was birthed. The 4 pillars were birthed: the pillars on transportation, the pillars on workforce and equity, the pillars on ending the dependency of fossil fuels, and the pillar of getting us to 100% renewable by 2050 was part of that bill. But we realized that in that bill, there was some work that still needed to be done. So in 2019, we did additional listen, lead, and shares, and going throughout the state to talk about what was developed and to get a consensus from the people around the state if this was the right bill to continue to push, or did it need some additional pieces in order for it to be a statewide agreeable bill. And that's what we did. And through that effort in 2019, that's how we came up with many of the equitable pieces in the bill, such as the Justice Fund or the Green Bank, such as making sure that BIPOC entrepreneurs would have the opportunity to engage in this expansion of renewable energy as we expand solar. And so that came from listen, lead, and share. And then you'll see a picture here on your screen. That's the day that the Senate actually passed the bill with 37 Senate votes coming out of the Senate, bipartisan vote being held. And I took a picture there with some of the advocates, along with the chief Senate sponsor, Senator Castro. And so we were really excited that this bill made it over the finish line. And you saw earlier in one of the pictures, the governor actually signing the bill. So the grow the number of environmental champions in the General Assembly was super important. One of the things that stands out to me was that many of the green champions signed a letter that says that if there was no equity and no climate in a bill, there was going to be no deal. And that stuck with us, that resonated throughout the coalition. One of the great things about the coalition was that we built trust amongst each other. And so whether you were downstate or whether you were northern part of the state, or whether you were in the city of Chicago, we all had self-interest on why we wanted this piece of legislation to pass. But we understood that everyone's self-interest needed to be included in order to make sure that everybody was pleased when it was all said and done. We may not got all we wanted, but we got majority of what we wanted. And also, one of the great things that I want to share is that we found out our strength as environmentalists. There was some contentious moments between labor and environment, but the great thing was that our legislative body, our governor, held strong, and he said that you have to work together, because they understood that the grassroots efforts that the environmentalists have done in these last few years gave us people power. And that's something that we continue to promote, is people power. And so this is just something, that picture there at the bottom of the screen, those are 20,000 signatures that we actually delivered to Governor Pritzker in 2020. And he was excited about that, receiving that. But before that, Governor Pritzker had already pledged through his budget address that he wanted to make a bill in climate that included the people, and it was not driven by the electric companies. And so that was important, because we understood then that we were going to get rid of fossil fuels, we were going to have equity in a bill, and the people of Illinois were going to benefit from this particular piece of legislation. So again, you heard me talk about 2018, 2019, 100+ communities, dialogues held across the state. All of those green dots represents places that we went. I went to some places that I didn't even know existed in the state of Illinois. And so I talked to some very diverse groups of people, and some folks that looked like me and some folks that did not look like me. But it was great meeting so many residents from the state of Illinois as I did those listen, lead, and shares. Policy experts used this feedback to directly inform the bill language, as I said, and no other energy bill in Illinois was shaped using an extensive community input like this particular bill. And that's why we ended up with this forward-leaning champion bill, and we are the state to look up to, because there's no other piece of legislation that looks like CEJA with an end to fossil fuel usage, as well as to make sure there's equity provisions for all of Illinois. And so some of the things in CEJA, whether CEJA old or CEJA new, and I laugh at that because at one time we had a lot of pushback on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and comes to find out poetic justice would allow that the bill would be called CEJA again, but it's the Climate Equitable Jobs Act now. So one, promoting jobs, equity, and economic opportunities, especially in communities of color. Some of the things that we wanted to talk about when promoting jobs, $80 million a year has already been set aside for the expansion of workforce hubs as well as entrepreneurship hubs. In those hubs, they will be addressing the disparities that we see in the BIPOC communities participating in renewable energy. This will allow BIPOC entrepreneurs to get trained in the area of renewable energy, solar expansion. They can even start their own companies after going through the training. When we promote these jobs, we wanted to make sure we promoted the equity. So we wanted to make sure that each company that is developed from, say, participating in this would have opportunity to bid on the projects that are coming down the pipeline, and making sure that they had the funds that were necessary to bid on such jobs. We have a green bank or a justice fund, and those funds can be tapped into to make sure that the business will be able to pay their employees while they're waiting for projects to be paid off. And then also, when we think about promoting jobs, equity, and economic opportunity, 13 workforce hubs strategically located throughout the state. Super important. We're going to talk a little more about that on our upcoming slide, but I wanted to share that with you. We wanted to ensure that Illinois reaches 100% renewable energy by 2050. Yes, by 2050. So we had to think, how do we get to that point? We know we can no longer be dependent on fossil fuels. We have to expand solar and wind. We have to think about how do we treat our planet better, and how do we get energy across the state without polluting our planet. So reducing the pollution of 1 million gasoline, diesel powered vehicles from the road. No, we're not going to take all of our gasoline vehicles off the road, but we're going to give incentives for people to invest in electric vehicles. Also, incentives around electric vehicle infrastructure was absolutely important. How do we make sure that communities of color have electric vehicle charging stations readily available if they do invest in electric vehicles? Also, how do we encourage municipalities to invest in electric vehicle fleets to take those diesel buses off the road that continue to pollute our neighborhoods? These are the things that we thought of as we continue to move forward. Again, CEJA is the most comprehensive piece of legislation out there. And so that's why we included these 4 pillars. And then finally, one of the biggest fights on our hand was achieving a carbon-free power sector with hard decarbonization dates that create jobs in communities abandoned by fossil fuel companies. A particular piece of our bill, Just Transition, says as we close down these fossil fuel plants, or as they close down themselves, the communities that are largely affected will be supported by substantial dollars, 40 million a year to be exact, so that those individuals be able to transition into renewable energy, and then the tax dollars that are lost will be supplemented while those particular fossil fuel plants are converted to renewable energy plants. And then those same individuals can capitalize on these new expanding jobs in renewable energy. Next slide. So here we are, September 15th, 2021. I just happened to be there at the Shed Aquarium as our great governor signed into law the SB 2408, which is now known as CEJA, the Climate Equitable Jobs Act. Sets Illinois again on the path of 100% clean energy by 2050, builds an equitable clean energy future for all of Illinoisans, and holds utilities accountable. Again, that was something that was missing, holding utilities accountable. This particular slide just shows you the strategic planning for the workforce hubs throughout the state. Again, $80 million a year for clean jobs, 3 in Southern Illinois, 4 in Central Illinois, 6 in Northern Illinois. Now look at the parentheses: Alton, East St. Louis, and Carbondale, downstate, Champaign, Decatur, Danville, Peoria, mid-state. And then in Chicago or Northern Illinois, we're talking about Rockford, west side of Chicago, south side of Chicago, south suburbs. And inside those workforce hubs will also be contractor incubator programs, or the same type of hub for contractor incubator, developing contractors to participate in this expansion in renewable energy. And so this map just shows you some of the spots where coal plants exist, and then some of the spots where we plan to put our workforce hubs, and those workforce hubs in red. Okay, so you heard me get all super excited about the jobs and economic justice. Wow. The reason why I was excited, because one of the things that I enjoyed about the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition was that every person brought their passion to the table. And one of my passions is economic development, jobs, and justice. And so we had fought for this to make sure that this bill had some real teeth. And one of the things that I was challenged on as an advocate from those legislators that I went to talk to the bill about, they said, please make sure that this bill has real teeth. So we mandated diversity goals for renewable energy. This is nation leading. You can't get these contracts unless you have some real diversity goals. It expands community solar and solar for all by 3.5 times more than what was for FEJA. Now, I think I recall Christina mentioning maybe FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act, that set us on this path of renewable energy in the first place. That happened in 2016, implemented in 2018, fell off the cliff real quick because they ran out of money. But some of the good things that came out of CEJA was this training that was happening in several parts of the state. This training started allowing people to, after a 10 to 12-week program, to come out as solar technicians. And now we see those same individuals climbing roofs, installing solar panels, making a livable wage. The exciting thing now is that as we expanded these opportunities in CEJA, many of those jobs that created the large jobs will be paying prevailing wage. I'm excited about prevailing wage because that's a lot more than even living wage. And so we are also looking at job training for returning citizens, and they don't have to wait until they get out of prison to start training. Those that are positioned to come out, training will actually happen inside the walls of the prison, where when they come out, they will be able to connect to one of our workforce hubs so they can start getting placement into these renewable jobs. So our path to 100 renewable energy future, 40% renewable energy by 2030. Again, it was important to reduce the dependency on the fossil fuel industry, but we needed to expand renewable energy. And so part of expanding renewable energy was to replace dirty energy with clean energy, 50% by 2040. So by 2040, you're going to see a lot. By 2040, you'll see a lot more solar panel farms and solar panels on roofs and our energy grid depending on solar and wind. And then one of the champions or victorious moments of the bill was the closing of the biggest polluter in the state and the seventh largest polluter in the country, which was Prairie State. And so we have an end date for them. They will be closed by 2045, no more dependency on fossil fuels. Thank you. So just transition, what happens to those communities that are impacted by the closing of fossil fuel plants? We don't want to leave them high and dry. So the bill has in its provisions $40 million a year to make sure that there's just transition, creates new community grants for fossil fuel communities to help address economic and social impacts of the energy transition, including replacement of property tax dollars. We voted that for a reason, because many of these industries pay local taxes to the state and to the community. And so we know that if they close, what happens to those tax dollars for restaurants and things that are surrounding? Well, replacement tax dollars will be available. Creates community energy and climate plans to help units of local government develop strategies to address climate change and increase clean energy. Yes, we are excited that we will be working with communities throughout the state to make sure that they have a plan so that they can capitalize on this expansion of renewable energy. I know I was having a conversation with the mayor in Peoria, and one of the things she was looking at, she really wanted to change out the entire bus fleet for their community with electric vehicles. That takes a plan. You just can't talk about it. You got to actually plan, make sure that happens. So then electric vehicles, as I segue into that, new incentives for electric vehicles, EV charging infrastructure, you heard me talk about that, creates a role for EV coordinator at the EPA to oversee existing resource distributions. Again, we want to make sure that the money just doesn't go flying out the window, but it's getting in the right hands at the right place to have the greatest benefit. Expands efforts to guarantee equitable investments in transportation and electrification spending. You heard me talk about municipalities changing out their vehicles. Now, I did a whole lot of talking. There was a lot of slides. And so I think, next slide. Okay, and then the consumer benefits. Let me just say this. Expands an energy efficiency program to save households money while reducing energy burden on low-income ratepayers. One of the things we realized was that those that can least afford to pay late charges and all kinds of stuff like that were being affected. And a late charge can be a matter of whether you keep your lights on or not. So it prohibits late payment fees and consumer deposits for low-income ratepayers, and then also eliminates the fee for using your credit card when you're paying your bill, and then extends energy efficiency goals and provides funding to fix health and safety issues when installing energy efficiency measures in low-income homes. Let me show you how that actually sounds. So if a person applies for, say, energy efficiency upgrades, and they came in and found out that before they put the installation in, they needed some repair on their roof. Many times before, that person becomes ineligible for the energy efficiency fixes. And so now there's a fund that will help them fix their roof so that after they fix their roof, they'll be able to benefit from the energy efficiency benefits that were going to be given to them. So again, thinking out of the box, again, remembering those that are needed most. Utility accountability and ethics reform. I'm gonna invite Christina back because I did a lot of talking. Christina, jump back in real quick and just talk about those 3 bullets around utility accountability and ethics reform.
Sure. Thank you, Pastor Unquay. So this is a very large part of why this bill was required, was because utilities have been allowed to set their own rates and kind of run the game without a whole lot of oversight or regulation, much to the to the disadvantage or disadvantaging consumers, right? And so part of this bill, part of why it's so important is that it, introduces accountability for the utilities and ethics reform. And so no longer will the utilities be able to just automatically set rates. Now they will have rates that will be decided by performance. If they're actually doing what they say that they're going to do on renewable energy, that will benefit them in the long run, right? And that will benefit all of us in the long run. But no longer will they just kind of get to be a shadowy group that makes these decisions without thought of consumer impact. There will be ethics standards with restrictions on lobbying and spending. This came up certainly as the ComEd scandal has shaken itself out in the past few years. No longer will that kind of behavior continue. They being utilities will also be, overseen by the ICC, which is kind of how it was working, but this is going to make it work a little bit better. So they'll be able to audit and enforce compliance of the utilities. And so we are trying to make a more just system of how these, they're corporations that want to make money, but they're also providing something that is, water and lights need to be basic human rights, right? So there should be no ability for these companies to absolutely gouge their consumers. So trying to fix that a little bit better in the legislation. So we're going to transition to hearing from our speakers right now and having a panel discussion. So I would invite you to direct any questions you might have to the chat. I will monitor the chat. There's already a couple of questions in here that might be worth discussing that some have come privately to me. So I will start feeding some questions to our panelists. But if anything comes up for you right now that you have a burning question you want to ask, start putting it in the chat. I think our speakers will have a chance to introduce themselves and say hi, and then we'll move along to the questions from the chat. So Pastor Anquay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Christina. We have two special guests that I've had the pleasure to work with in this advocacy movement. We have Brianna Parker from Elevate, and also we have Reverend Marcus Tabbs from the South Shore Methodist United Methodist Church, as well as the Samuel Parker DeWitt Conference. And so I want to throw a question to Brianna first. When you heard about the things that were in this bill, and I know I was talking kind of fast because I didn't want to monopolize all of the time, how do you think that the things that are in this bill going to impact people that you represent?
Yes, thank you, Pastor O. So at Elevate, we implement clean water, energy, and renewable programs to help communities that haven't had access. So for me, I got excited about the workforce development pieces of the bill because a lot of the contractors that we work with, there's so many barriers. There's barriers around just getting access to funding. There's barriers around the year that we're in 2021, and coming out of Brown versus Board of Education, which was years ago, and then the gentrification of cities, people don't know how to work with each other. They don't know each other. So I'm excited about the diverse hiring and, Black and brown contractors getting to the table and actually getting jobs and making money for their communities and bringing it back home to their communities. They can implement the things in the bill in their communities. I'm so excited about that. So
great. Thank you. And then Reverend Tab, how about you? When you think about some of the provisions of this particular piece of legislation, when you think about the people you represent, what piques your interest, or what things would you like to highlight from your community?
Well, at Samuel Willie Proctor Conference, we are on the forefront of social justice and looking at the intersection of social justice and climate justice. So seeing a lot of the same things that are said, as I'm taking notes, I'm could repeat a lot that you said, but I think for me, on both hats, it is really about the opportunities, as everybody said, that are coming to our community. When I think about BIPOC entrepreneurship, think about GMs by 2025, having 30 new electric vehicles out on the road. Well, how does that affect our communities? Would there be opportunity for that BIPOC entrepreneurship when it comes to the benefits of having charging stations in our community? With 30 new cars, certainly those cars will be coming to all communities. And so how does that affect our communities? Will we have those opportunities to have the same charging stations? It's just one thing as some of the other communities. Will the jobs that'll come into our community, the influx of jobs with the Solar for All, how that affects us, but also think about the energy savings programs that'll affect, as a pastor of a seniors, a congregation of seniors, being able to take advantage of some energy efficiency, some saving programs, and even those programs that are able to help them.
Great, thank you. Christine, I see some good questions in the chat. Let me see, I think, there's an easy question from Nicole Salisbury, and what are customer deposits? Customer deposits are required on people that may have marginal credit, and the utilities would make them put a deposit down to ensure that if they are late, that the utility would not lose any money on that account. And so the problem is that poor people, or people who are disadvantaged, not only don't have the money to come up with the deposit and to ensure that they cover their electric bill. It's money that the electric company puts into their working accounts, and they get interest on somebody else's money while it sits in their account. So it just looks bad that you take advantage of people who really can't even afford to even come up with a deposit. And what happens if they can't ever meet the deposit requirement? They can't get their lights turned on, or their gas. So this was a problem, and we saw that as a problem.
How much is a deposit? Excuse me for interrupting.
It can range. That's the interesting part, is that it was not always a set deposit. It can range depending on how bad your credit is, and what's your last electric bill. How much electric did you use at your previous address, and then they require a deposit. So it's really there's an unfair system.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, though.
Brianna, do you want to say what you just wrote in the chat out loud?
Yes,
Who's that?
that I've seen deposits as high as $300 for people that were without homes, and they was on a program to get a home, and then they still had this other barrier of, and it takes away from the money that they have to move in a place coming from a shelter. So it gets.
Yeah. Thank you, Brianna, for sharing that, because it's real. And as Nicole asked that question, it happens to disadvantaged people throughout the state. Another question that came up: does CEJA do anything about coal extraction that is shipped outside of the state? Now, CEJA doesn't particularly deal with the coal extraction. And I know the biggest coal extractor is Prairie State, because they have extraction as well as they use the coal that they extract to produce their energy. With them closing down, they're not going to have much use to do extraction. And I would have to talk to my experts on what they're going to do about coal extraction to other states. And hopefully those other states will wake up and say that we don't want the coal coming to them. Christine, you have any highlight or insight on that?
I think this might also get at a coal severance tax, which is a tax that many states that mine coal actually have, which was not in the final bill, but I do know that there is some appetite to take this on, perhaps going forward. Trying again, we have some work ahead of us to get to our renewable energy targets and our coal-free energy targets by 45 and 2050 and as we approach those dates. So there is some appetite for some grassroots work to perhaps see if we can't accelerate that a little bit by introducing some of this other legislation. So that would be other bills that come up later in the near future. But if we're talking about a coal severance tax here, that was not, to my knowledge, in the final bill.
Right. And I think that's an opportunity for us as we start introducing new legislation for people in the state of Illinois to start demanding that a coal tax be paid. Because one of the things that we really talked about in this bill early on was polluter pay. And it didn't make the final bill, but still there's room to introduce that in other legislative sessions. Vicki had a question, and this is a great question because this spurred a whole lot of debate on the Senate floor. And the question was, why was the electric car rebate not available to the entire state? Well, originally the electric car rebate was given to counties that actually extracted money from their residents for that particular rebate. But the good news is the governor said he wanted it to be available to the entire state. And so even though that legislator made that statement, I would encourage you that if you are interested in getting an electric car, get one quick, because the governor said that he wants that money to be available to the entire state, no matter whether your county participated in the rebate program or not.
Right. I think I'm hearing that there might be trailer bill language with that maybe going forward, but as the law stands right now,
get that request
so
in.
go get you an EV.
Yes, and one of the other highlights about EV, since we're speaking of EV, if you invest in a charging station at your particular home, there's an 85% rebate to the charging station that you install to charge your own electric vehicle. If you want your own personal charging station, there's an 85% rebate just for that. So that's good news too. So if you want to put a charging station in your garage, 85% of that is rebatable.
Yeah, that's really good news. My household is about to gain a extra driver as my oldest turned 16 in this past summer, and we have a plug-in hybrid. We just purchased another plug-in hybrid, and now I'm trying to figure out how to plug in everybody's car to charge it so we can use our cars. So we're starting to price out and look at how are we going to be able to do that. That was probably something we should have thought of before.
Sounds
but anyway,
like time to build out. Okay, Kenton had a question. Is there any impact of CEJA on rural Illinois electric cooperatives? Well, yes, because many of the cooperatives were actually buying energy from fossil fuel companies. And so as those fossil fuel companies are phased out, they will have to seek green energy or renewable energy in order to continue to provide energy in that cooperative situation. So there will be an impact on the cooperatives because they can no longer buy energy from fossil fuel companies. And that was one of the things that we did talk about as we went around to these cooperatives and legislators from the cooperative areas, to make sure that those cooperatives would be treated fairly. You were gonna say something, Christina?
Yeah, so this is again where the implementation phase of CEJA is going to be so critical. So there are groups of people who are working on this still and already from when we were trying to get CEJA passed right up to still. So there are groups that are digging into some of this, the real minutia of how to make rural electric co-ops more amenable to more renewable build out, how not to saddle people with higher rates once Prairie State closes. Like there will be a whole process of how that goes down. And so there are some very smart people working on this right now. I don't have a whole lot more information for you than that, other than they're working on it. And I'm sitting in on some of those conversations. I live in East Central Illinois, where this is absolutely a concern. So it'll be certainly part of my, interest to walk this through and watch what happens.
Well, speaking of implementation, I want to pull Brianna back into the conversation, because some of the implementation will happen because of meetings that we have with CEJA and beyond. So Brianna, talk about how we have leaders that come together on a weekly basis to talk about how we roll out a piece of legislation like CEJA.
Yeah. Well, since in the beginning, as Pastor O said in the beginning, we've been meeting for a while, like over a year, to come together as BIPOC leaders to talk about how we can ensure that equity stays on the table, and as we move into implementation, it's still on the table, and we're still thinking about it, and communities are in the know and aware about it. So we meet weekly on a Tuesday to talk about implementation, because I think that having it pass is the thing, but implementation, as Christina said, is the most important. So just offering a space if you're interested in some of the implementation conversations, and I have the Tuesday night time is available for you, or if you just want to talk about some of the things that you're interested in, I could try to connect you. I will put my email in the chat.
Great. And then I saw a stack from Nicole Salisbury from the Sierra Club. And so I'm going to bring her in, because I'm going to be partnering with the Sierra Club as we do a November 4th town hall that's not even listed today. That just came up. We're partnering with Senator Villehelm. So Nicole, you had a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Pastor Ankwe. I was wondering, will there be EV charging stations along the highways? And I was wondering also, you said earlier about people, investing in electric vehicles right away. Shoot, forgot my train of thought.
That's
but
right.
yeah. How soon should they start investing in it? And what if they don't have those? Yeah, what if they don't have those charging stations? Let's say, for example, in the rural areas that aren't set up yet. And how long will it take to set up those charging stations?
Well, that's going to be part of the implementation process of working things out. I would say that if you are interested in an electric vehicle, you can at least start looking at the vehicle and to see what the process will be to apply for the rebate. Because of course, there's going to have to be some kind of application process to apply for the rebate. As far as infrastructure goes, when we think about charging stations throughout the state, that is one of the plans in the bill. And also, we're going to piggyback on the bill that's coming out of the federal government that's also going to be putting charging stations strategically throughout the highways across America, because they realize that it's important for people that's going to buy and drive electric vehicles to have charging stations so that they can continue to not fill up, or just recharge as they go along the highway. So the rebate is set. Thank you, Christina, for July 1st, 2022. So thank you for pulling that information out. So that's the date for the rebate effective date. But the plan is to make sure that we do have charging stations, especially in EJ communities. Environmental justice communities are definitely not going to be left out. We wanted to make sure that when Pastor Tab puts his charging station at the South Shore Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, so because his members went out and bought some electric vehicles. That's the important thing. So we can put those in strategic places throughout the community, so you don't have to ride to the suburbs just to get a charging station.
Now, one more quick question. Do you consider also EJ communities, or does the bill consider EJ communities also those rural areas that have been impacted by coal and nuclear, not just some urban?
Well, yes, EJ community, of course, remember medium income, 80% of the medium income will designate EJ community status. Also, this bill also looks at R3 zones and many of the overlapping EJ communities are R3 zones, which again, communities that have been impacted or disproportionately not as wealthy as other communities would be considered those areas. So yeah, rural does not, it does, and thank you for saying that, because many times people hear environmental justice community and they think of inner city, and that is not the case. Environmental justice communities are not established because it's in the city or urban. Environmental justice communities are established because of the median income of the area and those residents that live in that area.
Thank you.
And I just dropped in the chat the EPA's EJ screening tool. So that is a really helpful, you can drop your address in it and it'll tell you like how near you are to an EJ community. And so it's a helpful tool. It's maybe not always perfect, but it is a tool that you can use to maybe start to get familiar with what those communities would look like around Illinois.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Laura, you had a question. I see you're in the stack. Laura Dirks?
Yes, hi, Pastor Angwe. I met you at the Open Lands Luncheon, so good to see you online.
Thank you, yes.
So I couldn't figure out how to put this in the chat, so I'm asking the question. So after CEJA, the 25% by 2025 or whatever the target was, you know, we're woefully behind on that. And I'm curious, like, who ultimately is responsible for the renewability of the grid? So is it the utilities? You're going to have to go out and seek development so that they can certify the renewability, so that, you know, we've got the Illinois Shines program and everything, but if they're going to be asking businesses and hospitals and people to make sure they can put solar on the roofs or community solar, like, who ultimately is responsible for ensuring those targets are met?
That responsibility is going to actually fall on the state legislation body, because they have placed inside this piece of legislation that every 5 years, there has to be an evaluation of exactly where we are with the development of renewable energy. And that will dictate on how fast we must go. And we have to explain away any hiccups on why we are not expanding according to the plan. All of our experts said that this plan is absolutely doable, and we should be expanding according to the schedule, where we are actually 100% renewable by 2050. But every 5 years leading up to that time, we are evaluated on our progress to make sure we're doing exactly what we said. And that goes back to the state legislative body to determine if we're meeting our goals.
So just a follow-up question to that. So but it would rely on, you know, the private industry's just interest in wanting to contribute to the renewable goals for them to, you know, to take action on it. There's nothing, you know, other than incentives and that kind of thing, they wouldn't move forward necessarily.
Yes, but the incentives are so great that, you know, why wouldn't you want to expand this type of energy with the incentives that have been placed before you to go in that direction? And I think they considered what the incentives would be. Would that incentivize people to actually, you know, create more solar farms? I know that there were many projects that did not get funded because immediately they had the lottery, and then all of a sudden we started hearing the solar cliff. There's not enough money to fund the projects. Well, there's the expansion of the money should allow many of those projects that were in the queue to actually get the green light, so that those projects can come into existence. And if I'm hoping I'm answering that question. I don't know about private industry on their incentive, but I know that it's, as far as like a ComEd or an Ameren, it would behoove them to do all they can to start increasing renewables, since we know that we're going in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see distributed generation projects, which are, rooftop solar and solar on churches and houses of worship. You're going to see those kinds of projects happening, but then you're going to see utility scale projects as well. And so there'll be kind of a combination of, those things happening at the same time. Okay, I think that might be the end of the questions that I see in the chat, and I see we only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that we talk about our upcoming town halls. This is an example of one of them with Senator Lightford coming up November 9th. I know, Pastor Enqua, you have several others that are scheduled as well, and so you can always go and find our events at the link in the chat at faithandplace.org to see the upcoming events and town halls. I'll also say that if your legislator needs to have a town hall, you can put pressure on that legislator and offer for them to work with us to help put something like that together. And so that will be coming, and you can do that kind of advocacy with representatives when you have that kind of relationship with them. But we're happy to help step in and do that. And so implementation is our next phase. We are certainly not there yet, but we're starting to sort ourselves into some groups around. This is just an example of what some of the groups are starting to focus on. So again, all of the things that we talked about this evening are included in this implementation. And again, people who are much smarter about policy than I are, oh, well. People who are much more, legally minded or, and such, and who write this kind of policy on a day-to-day basis are looking at actual language and then how we make this happen in our communities. And so it is the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition was built so that we could do this work together, and we are continuing to do this work together. People like organizers like us, and then policy people like them, working together to make this happen in our communities. So as we close out today, we would like to hear from you. How likely do you think this legislation is to positively impact your community? I'll wait for a moment while it pops up on your screen and you can answer your question. More than half of us have participated. I'll give it just another second. Right. So it looks like most of us, 64% of us, think that it's very likely that this legislation will positively impact our community. And then another, middle of the bell curve of us think that it's likely or somewhat likely that this will benefit our community. And again, being in constant conversation with your representatives about that is part of how that happens as well.
Well,
right.
I want to thank our policy coordinator, Christina Crows, first for teaming up with me to do this, What's Next. We encourage you to thank our legislators that took the hard vote to make sure that this bill passed. And so we encourage you to go to the Faith in Place Action Fund and sign a petition that thanks your particular legislator. You can find that on the screen there. And all you have to do is put your address in, and the thank you letter will go to your senator as well as your state rep. And then also I want to thank our esteemed panel today because they have been absolutely wonderful. Again, Brianna Parker from Elevate and Rev Tab from South Shore United Methodist Church and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And again, I encourage you to reach out to me personally. The last slide will include my email, but if you want to follow us on social media at Faith in Place Action is the area where you can see us with our posting. And then if you want to get action alerts, you can also sign up for action alerts. Again, if you have any questions that were not answered, feel free to email them to me, scott@faithandplace.org or christine@faithandplace.org. And our telephone numbers are also there. And then our websites for the Action Fund as well as the Faith in Place organization are there. If you would like to host your house of worship, to host a town hall or webinar, feel free to reach out to us, sign up at faithinplace.org, host a webinar, and we'll be glad to sit down with you and plan a webinar that's tailored to your audience. We'll be glad to do that. And again, thank you so much for being a part of this hour of sharing. And it is my prayer that all is well with you. And again, thank you to my comms team, Lauren Paris, for leading us through the slides, as well as making sure all is well in the background. Have a good night, everybody, and God bless and keep you.
And you'll receive a recording in your email in the next few days. Feel free to share that with others. If you weren't able to make it, which you wouldn't be hearing this right now if you didn't, you'll see a recording hit your email. Sorry, it's late. Okay. You'll see a recording to this later.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.